Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Namaste, welcome all viewers on this long night of Shiva, Hara Hara Mahadev, and we welcome Pandit Satish Sharma. He is the chair of the British Board of Scholars and also the managing director of World Hindu Foundation. Welcome Satishji, very, very nice to have you here on Jaipur Dialogue.
Pranamji, Om Gurubhyo Namaha and Har Har Mahadev, Om Namah Shivaya.
So, today we have this interesting topic, and I think the reverberations are going all around. We seem to be possessed by what I call Hindu-misia. I don't call it Hindu-phobia, because phobia means dread or a scare, but nobody is actually scared of Hindus. They somehow seem to hate Hindus for various reasons, and mostly irrational reasons, and mostly because of their own dogmas. It may be a leftist dogma, it may be what is called an Abrahamic dogma or whatever, but of course there is a dogma always at the back of hating the Hindus. And we have a lot of evidences. Now, you are a scholar of some repute, and you also studied 6 darshanas. You're authorized to teach 6 darshanas. How do you plan to tackle these dogmas?
Well, I can't think of anybody better qualified to tackle these dogmas than somebody who's been blessed by the attention and hard work of many of our incredible Sant Sannyasi Samajas, Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. I've been blessed with their attention. They've done a lot of hard work to make me semi-literate in these matters. And on the other hand, the other side of my existence is that I live in the nation which spawned the colonialist ethos and then exported it globally. And that ethos is based upon hatred of the other and creating a dialogue of the other in which there is a power dynamic at play. So on the one hand, there is my Hindu-ness, which is an agent of civilization, because all of us are agents of civilization. And on the other hand is my familiarity of having, shall we say, lived behind enemy lines for the best part of 50 years. So I'm uniquely qualified to try and understand what's going on and maybe use our incredible wisdom that we have to map and chart a way out of this so that the least harm is done and the maximum benefit is derived for everybody. So I'm finding this is my Karam Bhumi, and although it's not my Janam Bhumi, but this is the challenge that I have accepted that we have to face in this country.
Very rightly mentioned that this is the ethos where you live. They have these ethos of viewing the everyone else as the other. You know, somebody said that the Abrahamic belief system views everyone else as the other, whereas the Indian system only views, the Dharmic system views the other as another. So this conflict between the other and just another, I think this is a civilizational conflict of, what should I say, tolerance versus intolerance. And not even tolerance, as far as the Indian ethos are concerned or the Dharmic ethos are concerned, they are one of acceptance. You either accept or you simply say that, okay, we don't accept. So it is one of acceptance. And the other ethos is that, okay, they are intolerant or they tolerate, actually, that when they say tolerance, that also has an element of intolerance. Okay, I tolerate you. I don't accept you, but I still tolerate you. I oblige you by tolerating you. That seems to be the resonance that comes from that kind of an attitude. What do you have to say about that?
You're absolutely spot on. Sanjayji, there is an incredibly important part of what we're doing now. We're using the English language, and it's not a language which was even constructed for civilized dialogue in the manner in which our Dharmic languages are. It's a language which has always been used to dominate. And you can see the effects of it everywhere. But what you and I are going to try and do today, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity, is to imbue this language and to tame it and to try and make it suitable for talking about the things that we're talking about. And the language, you've talked about the other. This language is created for othering. There are ways in which the same word is written exactly the same but pronounced in two totally different ways. So that somebody who hasn't been given the secret of how to pronounce it in civilized company will pronounce it in a manner which automatically lowers them, and somebody can then grace them with the teaching, actually, no, you must pronounce it in this manner. So we don't say grass for the green stuff that comes out of the earth. We say grass. And in posh circles, one would use the word grass, and in not posh circles, one would use the word grass. And the whole language is created with this ambiguity built in so that othering can be achieved quickly, effectively, and dominance stops in. Now, you've seen it in Bharat. We have Mr. Shashi Tharoor, who leverages this principle at every opportunity. And it's nothing except an opportunity to establish a power dynamic. One is higher than the other, and straight away there is a gulf created. We don't have that. In our languages, they are perfected to be ideal repositories of sound and meaning, duplicatable. Anybody can pronounce them in exactly the same way in exactly any time. So we will try and navigate this today without othering anybody, unless we do it intentionally.
No, I do it intentionally because I have studied the what is called Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and I've devised my own counsels for them. And I have come to the conclusion that those rules for radicals and the rules for cultural Marxists, they cannot be countered by being rational. You just have to be, give them the same poodle that they give you. Anyway.
Exactly. As they say.
I respect your way of doing it.
Well, as they say, there's no point in taking a knife to a gunfight. And so you have to have the same implement completely. It's a wise position.
Because I was just looking at a book that you've written, Caste Conversion, a Colonial Conspiracy. Now, this is an incredibly reductionist position that the West has taken towards India and towards our Dharma, that tens of thousands of years of wisdom just been reduced to what is called caste, which was in itself a colonial construct of Lord Risley in 1871. And they tell us that, well, this is what you are, and we are damned to accept their construct and view ourselves in those very terms. And whenever we get up and say, then there are a lot of, I should say, the colonial zimmis, as I call them, the mental slaves, they come up on their behalf. Now, of course, they perfected this art of putting those colonial slaves, the mental slaves, in front of us. And then they tell us that, okay, look, your own people are telling you that you're wrong. That's because this is the construct that we have perfected. This is what we have given you. This was your fate, as Kipling said, that, okay, they are on a civilizational mission, and never the twain can meet. That construct they are trying to tell us in the 21st century. And a lot of us are simply swallowing it up.
This is the issue, in that we have the benefit of being the civilized children of people who refined themselves to such a degree that they realized that innocence as a frame of mind in a peaceful environment takes you very close to an experience of divinity. But that innocence becomes a vulnerability when you're faced with a corrosive, aggressive, dominating, theft-based mindset. And that innocence is really why so many of our people are fooled by the fancy robes, the flowery gestures, the hocus pocus, the smoke and mirrors, etc., when it's presented with authority. When an authority steps forward and makes these things, naturally innocent people have a tendency to say, well, okay, I don't really understand, but it must be true because this person who is so majestic is saying it. And this is why so many of our people don't question what's behind the motives. I think if we really need to make progress, then we have to invest in understanding exactly how colonialism was architected. How was it sculpted? What was its drivers? Who were the people? What was their mindset? What were their hopes, aspirations? There's no point in us talking about the caste system in India, as it's called, without understanding the philosophy of divide and rule, without looking at the actual history of how they maliciously leveraged the principles of divide and rule to dissect and deconstruct the fabric of a very, very civilized society. It's without question necessary to do that. Otherwise, you're living a life according to somebody else's game plan. Somebody else had sculpted that this is how we want Hindus to be able to live, and they have wound us up, set us on the path, and it's really worth pausing and just reflecting upon who we are, why we do what we do. Without that, we will carry on, and our life becomes a source of energy and a source of benefit for somebody else who doesn't have our interests at heart. We need to stop and introspect and study those, as well as studying the supposed flaws in the way that our society works.
Quite right. And of course, it's, I think, a fairly long topic. And if we go down that path, I think our entire time will be consumed by that. So what I will do is that I come to the symptoms immediately, the symptoms that we see, and the two symptoms that we've seen in the West, which are actually reflective of this malaise. And the first one is from your own country where you live these days and have been there for about 50 years, and that is the UK, and that is that whole affair of Rashmi Samant and the Oxford University. I mean, I haven't seen this kind of othering, and to think of that, if you look at these slogans on which Rashmi Samant won, they are all those very progressive slogans that the leftists generally use. So what happened ultimately? I mean, didn't they find Rashmi progressive enough? These are the slogans: inclusivity, LGBTQ, decoloniality. These are the kind of things that the Vokes are using in the United States. Those are very popular during the BLM movement. Here, someone like Rashmi Samant uses it and actually wins the election. And after that, she is othered so mercilessly that she actually resigns in disgust. So what was it? She wasn't leftist enough, or what is it?
So those are threads which I think reveal so much about the Oxford ecosystem as we explore them. And we've talked about othering and how there are degrees of othering, but let's introduce a new word. Let's call it ouring. And so there are degrees to which a person is ours, one of us. And I think prior to the election, everybody was convinced and happy that Rashmiji was actually one of ours, according to the Oxford left Indian ecosystem. Once she was successful, all of a sudden the news everywhere was that the first Indian Hindu woman becomes a part of the Oxford University Students' Union and president. And so now she's suddenly moved from being a close ours to being 2 or 3 degrees away from us. So she's moving from ouring to being othered. And I think that was really difficult for them to actually stomach. Who would go through a young person's Instagram feed going back 5 years to when she was 16, 17 years old to dig up questionable images and to then paint them and present them, proliferate them, and build up a rhetoric that it was an indication of intentional hate and condemnation? The images themselves are entirely innocent. I've had a look through the images with detail, and you will probably enjoy this. One of the images is where she's standing outside the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, and she makes a remark on there. She's 17 years old, and that image was deemed to be intensely anti-Semitic. And that was one of the major contentions. And they have really raised that to a high level. So, of course, the first thing I did when she asked me whether I could help her and our GHF to assist her in this, I sent the image to dear Jewish friends of mine who are lawyers who fight for anti-Semitism, and they've been challenging anti-Semitic tropes and everything else for such a long period of time. And they came back to me and they said, no, we don't find this to be an anti-Semitic image at all. It may be possibly narcissistic, taking a selfie in a war memorial, a Holocaust memorial, but it's not anti-Semitic. And who is the 17-year-old young lady with a fancy selfie camera who is not slightly and perfectly acceptably narcissistic? And so there is nothing anti-Semitic there. And yet what it did, it unveiled and revealed the capacity of young Oxford students to be triggered into a lynch mob by somebody who was skillful with words and wielded authority. And that's what Dr. Abhijit Sarkar did. His post is nothing other than an incitement to hatred. And if you look at how the mechanisms of incitement to hatred work, you can see they are all there. Step by step, he accuses her of Islamophobia, of being anti-trans, transphobia, anti-Semitism. It's a list of phobias which, if they were all encapsulated in one person, I'm confident that person would explode. There is so much hatred in that list. And yet what he does is he successfully dehumanizes her. All of a sudden, rather than a young lady in a strange country on her own studying, she becomes an object of hatred. And everybody else, all of these young people, their inner nature, their opportunity to acquire some sort of power by bringing somebody else down, came to the front. And that's the worrying thing, the capacity for supposedly highly educated people, intelligent people at one of the world's premier institutions, to be triggered so easily that they didn't even scrutinize the images. They didn't think to ask somebody, hang on, is this genuinely anti-Semitic? They just leapt to the lynching of her on social media. And that really gives me a cause for concern. I'm Dr. Abhijit Sarkar. If you have a look at his credentials, they are extraordinary credentials. He has lectured at Cambridge University, at King's. He has done lots of work with other premier universities. He's a senior faculty member at Oxford. And yet he has such a degree of emotional instability that he could project so much hatred on a young girl on her own, struggling to try and become something that satisfied her, the president, the first Indian Hindu president of the Oxford University Students' Union. All that education, and yet no emotional maturity, no sense of self-awareness. That's what really struck me. How on earth did he not realize that if I publish this remark and release it into social media, it will harm me? Can you imagine the amount of passionate hatred which would make a person so blind that they wouldn't even realize the harm they were doing to themselves? And so this is really I find this to be the troubling mindset which has permeated they used to be called social sciences, but I think a better name now would be the anti-social sciences, in that they are masters of lots and lots of words. They have fancy phrases, they have incredible titles which generally they give to each other with lots of academic backslapping. But when you scratch on the surface and see what's the person like, is this a compassionate person? Has all this education created nobility? Has it made a person who is now going to contribute to the well-being of humanity? There is an emptiness there. There is a hollowness there. And that hollowness, sadly, is too often filled with anger, inadequacy, contempt, and hatred. And this is really something that the establishments need to take a look at and get a grip on, because I would say that the university itself is really responsible for not having made sure that all of its wonderful, shiny policies about anti-bullying, about harassment of students, and creating a safe space in which we can explore knowledge, all of those policies, they're beautiful, they're shiny, they're so impressive. And yet how does somebody like Abhijit Sarkar thinks that he can thrive in that environment unless they have allowed it to happen? And this is not the first time. This is now the third time in my experience with Oxford University, and we're seeing the same identity the same mindset appearing in Rutgers across the world. We saw the same identity appear in Cambridge and do the same thing to Dr. Mrityunjay only last year. So there is something systemic, and that systemic issue is the one that causes me the greatest concern.
Questions following up from this. The first one, of course, is that don't we have an ecosystem in the UK that can shame this charlatan called Abhijit Sarkar? Of course, we have done our bit, but then doing it from India is not good enough. The second one is that why did she have to resign? Why couldn't she just fight it out? We would all have backed her up and made her fight it out. And the third is, how on earth do these humanities subjects become science? Social science is not a science. It is not even a pseudoscience. It is a dogma. We know all that.
What you get is, first you get a BS, and BS is an abbreviation for many things. And I was reminded by a dear friend. He said Oxford is actually the name of a place where oxen used to cross a bridge, and so don't expect there to be a shortage of BS where oxen have been crossing for thousands of years. But the first thing my friend said, he said you get a BS, and that's for obvious reasons, and then you get an MS, which means there's even more of the stuff, and then you get a PhD, which means it's piled high and deep. Our ancients gave a really lovely phrase for this. They called it pushpitam vacham. That these are flowery phrases. They have created a whole ecosystem and clothed it with credibility by each of them creating their own gardens of pushpitam vacham and then awarding each other recognition. And I'm absolutely sure that if they actually were to scrutinize each other's work, they understand it. Gyan and Vidya is completely absent. It is merely a web of words which everyone thinks must mean something, and yet no one seems to be able to work their way out of. It's the classic, an emperor who has no clothes, transferred into academia, and then holding court with lots of other naked kings.
Quite right. Absolutely. Got it spot on.
I do apologize for lowering the tone of the conversation and introducing...
I appreciate it. We need to get dirty to be able to wrestle with pigs.
Well, as I say, when something hits the fan, then one has to take remedial action, and it certainly has hit the fan in this particular instance.
Yes, it has. And I think whatever I can do to Abhijit Sarkar, I will do. Let's see, let me explore the opportunities and the...
You raised two questions, which were really good questions. Would you mind if I just pick up on those?
Yes,
One was, why did she resign? And this is important to understand. Now, I always teach, I do a lot of work with youngsters, and I always teach them, never leave a Kurukshetra. Never you withdraw from it. Let somebody defeat you. And it's a great example of that principle here. What happened was that the Students' Union itself succumbed to the pressure of this lynch mob. And the Students' Union, rather than protecting her, remember the Students' Union came into existence purely and solely to protect the interests of students and to especially make sure that faculty and administration did not in any way harm, bully, diminish, or undermine any of the work of the student body. And so for the Students' Union to turn on its own newly elected president and succumb to pressure and say, we are being denigrated, we are feeling our reputation is being tarnished, you must resign, otherwise there will be a vote of no confidence in you. And so when the Oxford University Students' Union is piling that pressure upon you, and you're a young person on your own in a foreign country, and in addition to that, you are having to bear the pressure and resist the daily deluge of criticism and hate. It doesn't take, it's a really strong person who would resist and say, I'm going to fight this out on my own. And as she felt on her own, she then resigned, thinking that if I apologize to everyone, at least I'll be able to save some aspect of tolerability so that I can finish my course. She's there as a student studying as well. And the impact upon her studies, the impact on her deadlines and coursework and everything else is very, very significant. I'd like to just add one thing, and that is that she is in the sciences arena. She is not she is not an anti-social scientist. Okay, she is in the sciences arena doing mechanical engineering, and everybody on that side, her own department, her own faculty, they have been hugely appreciative and supportive of her. They have tried to give her all the support they can, but that too is limited. It's only the administration which has fallen short, and indeed the faculty of the history department and its anti-social scientists.
Oxford administration, that's what we can say from here. And then we have this great example of Rutgers University standing up for her, what is called precious jewel, Audrey Truschke, who actually defends Hindu genocides when she defends the mass murderer like Aurangzeb. And even though all the universities, all the US universities are surrendering to the wokes left, right, and center, here is one instance where a university is heroically stood up for its associate professor.
There is another dimension to this which I find very deeply troubling. Do you remember we talked about othering and the dynamic between two parties in any situation? When you look at Sanatani teachings, the Guru Shishya Parampara, there is a different dynamic in the transmission of knowledge. There is a guru who is generous, there is a student who has mastered the yamas and the niyamas to such a degree that they have become humble. And that is their adhikar, that proves that they are adhikari. And in that scenario, there is a beautiful flow, a loving flow that happens. This is the way how we deal with academia and transfer of knowledge. Now, if a person hasn't satisfied the yamas and niyamas and hasn't sort of established them within themselves, they tend to be greedy, they tend to be acquisitive, they're certainly not humble, but they want that knowledge. And so all of a sudden wanted the knowledge, but they did not want to lower their forehead to be able to receive it with grace. And so I always look for signs of that sort of a student. And for Audrey Truschke, as she's, I think is the name of the professor, there are all the signs that this person has not established the yamas and niyamas. Certainly there's no courtesy, there's no humility, there's no respect for the most ancient continuous civilization on the planet. What there is the colonialist desire to grasp, to seize, and to maintain a long, hard-fought position of control. We see in her the desire to control. And we need to understand that this is nothing to do with an exchange of scholarship. What this is to do is purely and solely to maintain the hierarchy of power. Why on earth would a person, a white, Christian, American person, feel the need to comment on something to do with a different civilization, a different nation, a different spiritual identity? This is the classic, what they call the white savior mentality, isn't it? And that's a purely colonialist mentality. It says that I know more about you than you know about you. You know, this is what Lord Canning said once in a gathering in front of Hindus, that, you know, we Brits who have been trained in British grammar schools know more about your religion than you Hindus do. Okay, and it's the same mentality that we're now seeing in dear Audrey. She has absolutely no authority to pass comment. And not only that, there is so much work to be done in her own house that she is an interloper. She is an intruder in our house. And we need to stop trying to educate her. We need to stop trying to make her into a person, a better person. We need to throw her out of our house, our intellectual house, our academic house, so that she can go to her own home, reflect, have a look at the condition of her own home, and then we can engage in a conversation. We must stop trying to teach these people. We have to remove them. They have no right to cast any aspersions or to make any comments until they themselves have created Swargalok in their own communities, in their own religious communities, and in their own academic communities.
Well, beautifully put, Satish ji. I couldn't agree more. Actually, she is nothing if not a white supremacist. Her own family is actually, I think she belongs to a parishioner's family. Her own background is that of a church background, and we very well know how church views the dharmic paramparas, dharmic traditions, and we also very well know that for anything that you throw at her, all she says that she throws authority at you, and she says that I am a trained historian.
I would
To
love
hell
to
with
have
the
a
trained
conversation
historian.
with her one of these days. I really would.
No, no,
And
she'll block you. She'll block you. Don't worry. She'll block me also.
you
So
see, a
that's
part of
the
me,
one-way communication from her.
well, a part of me feels sympathy because, we look on the earth as our Lakshmi Devi, who has been creating bodies for 100,000 years to create a physical form which can experience Atma and Paramatma joining. And yet when I look at somebody like Audrey, and I see a person who has been abused intellectually and in terms of her heart, both her head and her heart have been so confused and abused at a young, sensitive age that now she is an Atma trapped in the jail of a conditioned mind, and her heart has been filled with a sense of guilt, which transfers itself into hatred for the other. And so there's a person here who is suffering from a deep trauma, but the only way to help her come out of that trauma is to use the practices of Gyan Yoga, and some of them will be very gentle, but others will really help her to deeply introspect on who she is as a being. What has happened to her since she opened her eyes for the first time on this planet as a bright, shiny Atma capable of doing such incredible work, and suddenly she's transformed in the middle of her years into somebody who needs to denigrate a civilization on the other side of the earth to make herself feel good, to make herself feel she's fulfilling a purpose. There is a deeply troubled individual there, and it would be a great opportunity to perhaps minister to her. If I ever have the opportunity, I would love to sit with her and talk about some of these issues.
You're quite right. I mean, not for nothing that the Dharmic system has so many terms for what the West loftily calls by one term education. So we start with Saksharta, then we go to Suchana, information, then we go to Shiksha, teachings, then we go to Vidya, education, then we go to Gyan, that is knowledge. Then we go beyond Gyan, and then we go to what is called Para. For these ignoramuses who have actually closed their eyes to this kind of a vast repository of wisdom that the Dharmic system is, they just see it as some kind of a privilege, the white privilege. I think she is just a spoiled white privilege card holder. That's about all. And I agree with you totally that we don't have to try and educate her. We simply have to throw her out from our house. Don't allow her at all. And for that, I don't mind being intolerant. I don't even mind being aggressive. I don't mind even being abrasive.
If somebody were to walk in through my front door and start to criticize my dear Dharmpatni's cooking and my children's behavior, I wouldn't seek to educate them and tell them, no, these are wonderful people. The first thing I would do is throw them out as a barbarian, as a person who wasn't fit to be in the company of civilized people. And, our body of knowledge is our home. Our nation is our home. Our culture, our Adhyatmik Vidya is our home. And we have to stop people from coming in and making such a mess in our homes. So this is something that I think is important, but there's a revelatory dimension here as well. And when you think about why are these people behaving in this manner, that's also worth understanding for our Bharatiya community. Because when you place it in the context of 1,000 years of civilizational interaction, let's say of the Bharatiya experience of interfaith, shall we say, over the last 500 years particularly, it's not been a good experience. And I think it's fair to say, now that we understand and we know what the same ideology did in every corner of the world, I think it's fair to say that the Commonwealth, I see it as nothing other than a crime scene. It is one of the largest crime scenes on the planet, and it was covered by this idea of the Commonwealth. It's an idea that was sold to us. But they are in a fix, because what's happened is they have been to lots of other houses, they have stolen lots of shiny bits, and they have mugged and abused and hurt and assaulted the people in those houses, and come back home and decorated their home so it looks so beautiful. But now, the story that they have been telling themselves and their own citizens is different to the story that the people in the other houses are beginning to tell each other. I speak with Native Americans, I speak with African friends and Australian friends, and it's the same story. All of them are saying, actually, the people who mugged you guys are the same people who mugged us. And there is a conversation now beginning to happen everywhere. And so the academic institutions of the West were established to reinforce the idea of Euro-Christian superiority. And then not only just reinforce it, but to defend it on an ongoing basis. And what's happening is that story is now beginning to come apart at the seams. Not only that, they're finding, hang on, these brown people who we were told were inferior to us, they're coming to our institutions and they're doing really well. In fact, if you look at the statistics in the States, it was, I think, revealed only last year that Harvard was guilty of actually discriminating against and trying to reduce the successful, the hardworking, academically brilliant people from the Asian community, because there were too many of them. So can you imagine the quandary that they are in? They're in a very difficult place, and there's no way out of this. This is, they are in a Dharm Sankat, and it's a civilizational Dharm Sankat, which is about to, I think, come to a moment of incredible spiritual growth. This is the best way I can put it.
Yes, I think I just put something more to it, and that is, I think, the whole quandary that they are faced with is actually compounded by the fact that under Narendra Modi, India is a confident country. Of course, we have this 75-year-old malaise of seeking validation for everything that they do from the West. But it is now significantly reduced. It's not quite as acute as it used to be even 10 years ago. No, of course, I still find it in very many significant sections, even among the Dharmic people. But significantly reduced. And if it continues this way, and they are not able to reinforce the guilt that they had imbued in us, I think that they will very soon find that they are sitting as an equal at the high table with them.
Well, I think they're more worried that, in fact, they'll be removed from the table because it will be found that actually they have terrible manners and they don't know how to eat properly, and that the people who are sitting around them are now beginning to look at them and saying, well, actually, they haven't even washed their hands. It's time they left the table and sort of improved their quality of company around a dining table. This is the larger worry that they have. But, you know, we should be seeing this. I look at it from this point of view, in the way that when Sita was captured and taken to Lanka, Ram wandered in the Vanvas for lost as a human being. He had no direction. And Hanumanji needed to remember who he was before he could release and help in the rescue of Sita. And we are at that situation now. Bharatiyas are beginning to recognize and remember who they are, like Hanumanji was. And if Sita is the Atma Vishwas that a Bharatiya should have, that confidence in their ancestry and their generation, the British kidnapped it. They took it and brought to London, and ever since, Sita has been trapped in London, right? And we have been wandering around like Ramchandraji, thinking one day, you know, I will find my missing part. And the only way to find that missing part is for Hanumanji to remember who he is, to cross Lanka, release Sita, recapture their Atmavishwas, and take her back to Ayodhya. And hopefully now with the Ram Mandir being established, we might even see a return of Sita, Ramchandraji and Hanumanji coming back and re-establishing their Ram Raj.
I think that's a wonderful metaphor, Satishji. I think I'm really overwhelmed by that particular metaphor. I think it's something that needs to be quoted again and again everywhere. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you kindly for that. You do know that with that metaphor, then I become Vibhishan and London becomes Aaj Ki Lanka, na?
So that's it. This is the Lanka that we need to actually conquer, and then after that we spurn it, and then we say that, okay, api Swarnamayi Lanka, Name Lakshmana Rochate, Janani Janma Bhumishcha, Swarga Dapi Gariyasi.
Om Tat Sat.
On that point, let's move to our audience questions and answer. We have quite a few. And we request all our viewers to please keep asking some questions. It's not every day that erudite people like Pandit Satish Sharma come to Jaipur Dialogues, and let's benefit from his erudition and his very, very deep understanding of this situation. You just heard that great metaphor. And also, I request all my viewers, as usual, to please keep liking the channel and sharing this video as much as they can, subscribing the channel, pressing the bell icon, and of course, keep favoring us with their contributions. Let's move to the question and answer session.
Just before...
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Sorry, you were saying something before.
I was just going to share, Sanjay. It's actually been a pleasure. And people who have done a little bit of sadhana and they've done a little bit of dharmic learning, this is how they engage. They engage with delighting in the discoveries that we've made, each other have made, and delighting in sharing with them. Why can't we have these sorts of conversations with people like Audrey? The day we can, then we have made a huge leap forward. And I think your and my interaction today, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm really grateful that you've taken the opportunity to invite me onto the show so that we can have such a good time with each other. Thank you for that. Really.
Thank you, Satish. The delight is equally mine, and I'm sure that after this we will engage in more frequent conversations and maybe even deeper topics, because you have that kind of a depth which we can engage with.
I'm at your disposal.
Let's move to the questions and answers. Nonikanta, Panditji, you or anyone else doing anything about this Abhijit character?
Wonderful question, and that is always the question that people of action should ask. What are we doing and what comes next? So I'll share with you. Okay, so a case has been registered with the police. The statement that Abhijit made, there are numerous statements which are unpleasant, they're harassment, they're bullying, but his last statement is actually inciting of hatred against a religious group. He refers to us as Sanatani, and he says that Oxford is not ready for a Sanatani president. And that is criminal hate speech. And so because Oxford University falls under the same police force as my own police force, and acting with permission from Rashmiji, I have started a criminal action. We've reported it to the police, and an investigation is underway. This falls in two spaces. One is criminal and one is civil. And so we will try and exhaust the criminal in the first instance, and then if need be, we'll resort to the civil aspect of it. But already, I think Oxford University are in the wrong, and they will need to apologize and make some sort of restitution, because somebody making that sort of a statement is not fit to be in the company of Hindu students. It is a violent statement, it is a hateful statement, and he should have been suspended straight away. He hasn't been suspended, and we shall be asking why. So yes, there are a group of very passionate, committed Sanatanis here in the United Kingdom who have taken this up, and we are pushing it through. We have parliamentarians who are going to get involved in this. And only today, before coming onto the show, I had a contact from the BBC who was saying, we need to talk about this issue. It is rampant, blatant Hindu odium. Now, Hindu odium is my magical word, and it means it's the exact, precise equivalent of your Hindu-misia. It's exactly the same. But it means a contempt and a hate for Hindus by virtue of the fact that they are Hindus. So yes, we're going to do our best to try and make some systemic changes, but also to try and create an environment such that Rashmi can return and continue her studies without this lynch mob continuing their abuse and hatred. She should be able to come back and enjoy the experience of being amongst real scientists in the STEM departments at Oxford without the noise and the harassment from these antisocial scientists. So yes, we will do our best.
Right. And viewers, there are two major takeaways from this particular video. Stop using Hindu phobia. Use Hindu-misia, that is from me, or Hindu odium, that is from Pandit Satish Ji. Okay, so those are two wonderful takeaways. Thank you. Next question, please. Devashish Mishra, Panditji Pranam. Why the Tory government in the UK isn't doing anything substantial to challenge the left ecosystem, in your opinion?
And again, an excellent question. And I'm really happy to be able to share this little bit of news with you. So everybody must remember that Boris Johnson, once upon a time, was the editor of The Spectator magazine. Now, The Spectator is one of those fearless magazines which doesn't mind upsetting and offending people. And so it's always been the target of the left ecosystem. And now the former editor of that magazine is the Prime Minister. And this is one of his personal pet projects. He is absolutely adamant that freedom of speech is not going to be diminished. So last year, the Tory government, announced an initiative that they were going to legislate to prevent universities restricting freedom of speech unless they put their own act together. And so the universities have all gotten together, and they are now saying that they will introduce policies which will try and prevent this left ecosystem, this cancel culture, this deplatforming culture from taking root. And if it has taken root, then it will be removed. Otherwise, the government has said, we will legislate. And if we legislate, then there will be sufficient penalties and consequences of breaking the law. So we are looking forward to this balance being restored, and the hyperactive, overly intoxicated lefties from settling down a little bit and perhaps becoming a little bit more tolerant.
Well, tolerant. They will not become accepting. They at the most will become tolerant.
Well, you can only manage so much in one janam.
Okay, but good news. But that's very good news.
Indeed, indeed.
Next. Okay, Nonikanta, Panditji, it's so nice to see an aggressive you. Okay.
Oh no, I'm not an aggressive you. I'm not an aggressive you at all. I'm a comfortable you who has studied my Gita and knows that you should enter into the fight, but never let the fight enter into you. And so we have to fight this fight. That is part of being a servant of Dharma.
Right.
But thank you. We need more assertion. We need more strength, but we don't need aggression.
Divyanshu Mehta, the Abrahamic religions would want to destroy Sanatana Dharma. You need to understand that in order to tackle this situation. Of course, Panditji does understand that. Okay.
And it's absolutely true. I'm pleased that we have more people beginning to say this so clearly. We are at that stage we're past the stage where Krishnji as a Shanti Dut went to Hastinapur and asked for 5 villages. And Duryodhan said, I'm not going to give you even 5 villages. I'm not going to give you the amount of land that would fit onto the point of a needle. And it's because it's an existential threat. The Abrahamic traditions, missionary traditions, know that if Dharmic Vidya touches a person, that person is transformed. And you can't enslave a person who is Dharmic. You can only destroy them. And so it is an existential problem. We need to recognize that, and we need to find dharmic ways in which we can meet this challenge. I said once in an interfaith gathering, I asked a very senior bishop in the Christian tradition, how is it possible for cannibals and vegetarians to coexist in peace? Because that is exactly the situation that we are in. And so I said, if you can explain that to me, then I'd be really happy to engage in interfaith. But for the moment, I don't want to be eaten.
That's quite right. So that's the situation created by our constitution when it gives freedom of religion to people whose religion says that converting the other is their religion, is the core of their religion. So
We
I
have to
think there
address
are
this constitution. This is the issue of language that we touched upon at the beginning. We need to use dharmic words. We need to use, instead of religion, we need to use vidya, gyan, adharam, sat, asat, and look at the whole constitution from those principles and those ideas, and then we will leap forward. Then I will feel that India has finally started its journey to being totally decolonized, to translate the constitution into
absolutely,
even better dharmic language.
absolutely, absolutely. In fact, you know
And
what?
thank you for that last
I'll
question.
find something. If you look at the translations of the Constitution and the way they have translated secular, secular in Hindi is translated as Panth Nirapeksh. I'm talking about the official translation. But in Telugu, there's a beautiful term that they've used for secular. They call it Laukik. Laukika.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of the Indian terms. But then
And-
some other languages have taken Dharmanirapeksh, like I think it's in Bengali, Dharmanirapeksh, Marathi, it is Dharmanirapeksh.
As I
something
said,
like that.
the English language is a brilliant language. It's sufficiently confused to maintain the status quo. If you've got power, there's nothing like the English language to fill lots of grey confusion so nobody can work out what's going on. And this word secular, my goodness, every time we come across it, we think, no, it's the wrong word, it's the wrong meaning, it's the wrong solution to a problem which doesn't exist in Bharat. We need to get rid of it completely. It has absolutely it contributes nothing to the evolution and renaissance of Bharat as a world player.
Oh, I know, absolutely. In fact, in practice, what has happened is that it has come to mean anti-Hindu.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
it
And yet
is,
it's
and every Hindu is expected to be secular, not just the state. That's the kind of situation that it has come to.
no,
Anyway, let's move to the next question.
every Hindu should realize that the price of friendship should not be self-destruction. That's a complete nonsense, and no creature on the planet does it.
Okay. In fact, Twitter was till yesterday suspending handles that were giving voice to Rashmi Samant. Today,
That's
I
correct.
think some of them have been restored after the outrage and threat to them that we will move the Indian government. Anyway, Satish Das, pranam to both. West is certainly anti-Hindu, and Indian liberals left wokies keep feeding them unhealthy food, which West keeps digesting for their benefit. I think it's a comment. Still, if you want to say something.
And it's I'm not going to challenge that comment. I think it's entirely true. But I think everybody should realize and read and understand that it was the intention of the most violent white supremacists that Indians should arrange for their own self-destruction. This is part of the scheme. And everybody should realize that life is too valuable. We have been through 84,000 janam before we acquire a human form. Why on earth would you sacrifice that human form without even perhaps inspecting what you were doing with it and why you were doing it? So yes, we need to find ourselves. If we find ourselves, we're unstoppable. And not only are we unstoppable, we will actually bring balance to a world which is consuming itself.
Quite right. Next one. Oh, this is a nice pseudonym, Audrey Truschke. Truschke's father-in-law, Nathan Rain, owns a Maryland, USA-based NGO, Bless India Ministries Incorporated, involved in sex scandals in India in 2012. Well, he is a confirmed evangelist. Of course he is.
He is, and it's worthy for people to note. I mean, in the West, people are beginning to notice this. In the UK, certainly, the attendance at churches has plummeted. There is such a movement away from the religion established by law in the United Kingdom, Churches are, I think 700,000 was the attendance over one weekend nationally. Now, if you look at how many Hindus go to the mandirs in the UK, I think we probably exceed that in normal non-COVID times. But we need to recognize that what they're selling has it has never delivered, and it's no longer going to deliver. You can't be a champion for the loving Christ while you're standing and building your ministries on stolen indigenous land, and where the indigenous people are still persona non grata. In fact, I don't know whether you're aware of, or your viewers are aware of this, Sanjay, you probably are, but persona non grata means that you weren't granted the privilege of being considered a person, that you were fauna and flora, that you were actually part of the animal kingdom and not part of the human kingdom. And as such, you were given grazing rights. In America, the reservations where the poor Native Americans, the indigenous people, they live, they're reservations. In fact, they're very similar to putting cattle into grazing areas. So there is a horrific amount of violence in Audrey's own backyard that she could be working on if she was a genuine servant of humanity and of divinity. But clearly she isn't, and that's why she's pointing fingers at a traditionally very gentle, very civilized, very accommodating group of people, and that's us.
That's right. And of course, the American natives are still subject to the law of discovery. You know that.
Absolutely.
The famous papal bull.
Yeah, the law of discovery, the doctrine of manifest destiny. And if your viewers are interested in these things, they should really look up the Code of Theodosius. It makes the worst translation of Manusmriti look like a menu for a Sunday afternoon lunch.
Absolutely. Next one. Seema Gupta, can we help strengthen the Hindu network for our children studying in UK? Diwali, Holi celebrations.
Yes, we can. Yes, we have to. But I would say there is a really important element in this, and that is that children learn not by virtue of what you pour into their ears, but by virtue of what they see their parents do. If their parents are pakke Sanatan Dharmis who are enjoying and reveling in the beauty of their own traditions and their own knowledge, who know why we have certain sanskar, who know why we have certain tyohar and everything else, then the children will just flow into it and they will preserve it and it will become them. But in the UK, like most immigrant populations, we've been through a period where the parents have been so busy trying to earn and to create a life and to get security that they have possibly not been able to invest enough time in their own evolution as members of the Sanatani family. And so there's a wonderful opportunity for parents to immerse themselves as well and then work together to support their children. I'm blessed. I have three young men in my family, and I knew from an early age that in England, where the background conversation and the painting, the culture that we're flowing in and living in, it would take them away from Sanatan Dharma unless I knew a good answer to every question they were ever going to ask. And if I didn't know, then I couldn't share it with them convincingly. And so that's what I had to do. And that was part of my own journey, and it was a wonderful thing. And if all of the Hindus in the UK take the same approach, we will have such a wonderful community here, which can not only build a community for our own children, but change the face of this country. Can you imagine if Great Britain became a Sanatani place where people were living according to Dharmic principles? They would heal, the country would be more prosperous, GDP would go up by 300%, using economists' templates. But the key to it is that each and every one of us needs to become fully aware of what it means to be a member of the Sanatani family. Then everything else will flow from that.
Very good explanation. Next one. आशीष प्रताप सिंह सिकरवार, विदेश जाने वाले भी तो इसी शिक्षा से ग्रस्त हैं.
Okay. I think that was a suttur, wasn't it? And what we need is somebody to explicate it and expand it.
Okay, what he's saying is that all those people who are going abroad are actually afflicted by the same problem.
This is true. This is true. And not only that, when they get here, they find that the life is not what it was sold to them as. And there is a lot of hard work to be done in this day and age to build any sort of a future here. It's tough for people who have been here 2-3 generations. And we have had to fight for every square inch. If we wanted to build a mandir, then we had to fight for car parking space and fight for school space and everything else for 3 generations, and it's been tough. And so I did a talk not so long ago where I predicted Ghar Wapasi for people outside of Bharat, because I think the environment is changing, and unless we make a big difference, it will become increasingly difficult. We may well see a situation like happened with the Indians in Kenya, in Uganda. We may see the same thing happening in Mauritius, in Malaysia, and other places where extremism is taking root. So we don't have a choice. We have to work together, we have to build our networks, and we have to share our intelligence, not only for our own benefit, but that will help to make a Bharat which is strong, and not only that, make every other country a better place for human beings to live. We know the secret of how to live on this planet. We have all of the vidya how to thrive in this place that we find ourselves. Nobody else has it, and we're not going to do it. तो और कौन करेगा?
Quite right. Okay. Next one. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this conversation, and it is exactly the mark of 1 hour. Thank you all viewers, and wonderful having Pandit Satish Sharma with us. I think we really had a wonderfully deep conversation, and I really look forward to more conversation of this kind in future. Thank you, Panditji. Thank you all viewers. Jai Hind, Jai Ma Bharati.
Jai Marti, and Har Har Mahadev. Sanjay ji,
Har Har
thank you for the opportunity to have a
Mahadev.
conversation.
Exactly. Long night of Shiva.
Indeed, indeed. Namaskar, everybody.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.